Today, we're going to talk about a big issue in the comic book grading space, specifically with CGC. And whilst you guys might sit back and say, well, what does comic books have to do with sports cards? There are parallels to this scam that are also happening in the sports card space. And I think also some of the outcome we might see from CGC with their comic book grading might flow into sports cards as well. So I think this sort of stuff is super relevant. So, just because you don't collect comic books, please don't switch this off, because the talking points are very important, especially to sports card and sports card grading. Now, if you guys are not sure what I'm talking about, Neo Cards and Comics essentially did a really good job covering this, as did a few others, but I'll point you in the direction of Neo's video. And what he does highlight essentially is how big this scam actually is. And to give you some context on what the scam is, you essentially had an individual allegedly buy some CGC graded books or submit them himself. I don't quite have the answer on that just yet. And he was basically cracking those slabs open, taking that book out and replacing it with an inferior book, i.e. he's basically taking a 9.0 graded slab, cracking it, putting in like maybe an 8.0 or 7.0 within there, resealing it, and then selling it off to somebody, making money off that fraudulent book, and then also, have the ability to now sell that book that he took out, right? Or keep it for his PC or do something, right? And you're talking, thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I don't think the figure is quite confirmed yet, but this could be well into seven figures, as we've seen in the past with sports cards as well. And like I said, it's very, very alarming. So you can sort of see here, it's a lot of Bronze Age books that Neo references within this clip, but there's also the problem here of actually not knowing how big the problem actually is. Now, my understanding is that Automatic Comics was the one who first figured this out, and then it's sort of trickled through the rest of the hobby. I could be wrong on that, but it's a sort of huge problem. And a lot of people were sort of looking at this and thinking, well, what the heck is CGC doing? Because if you guys weren't aware, CGC is essentially the PSA of the comic book space, but they're bigger than PSA, right? They're so much bigger than PSA from a comic book perspective, and they've done so much good work within this hobby, and it's just very alarming to sort of see a scam like this happen and then see silence from them for so long. Now, they've since come out with a statement, which is over here, and you can sort of read this for yourself, and what they essentially talk to is the fact that this is happening with a few hundred books, and they know the individual, they're looking into it. But again, the concern is, well, how big is this problem? How widespread is it? Does it impact more than just this one person? I don't think we have the answer of that. They've been around for 36 years. They've graded 85 million collectibles, as they do talk to here. One thing that I think is super important is that they do have a very strong guarantee. It's why I've submitted some of my sports cards to these guys, albeit when this news broke, I made me a little bit concerned about doing that fact. But the guarantee is quite robust, and they've come out and said if you're somebody that's bought one of these books or you've been financially impacted, they're going to look after you, which I think is a good thing. And I don't think every grader moves that way, especially in sports cards. BGS, as an example, do not have a guarantee that operates like that, and we'll get to BGS in a second because they've got issues like this as well that we've talked to in the past. But it's sort of good to see them come out with a statement, but again, very worrying to sort of see that this problem happens in the first place. And this is sort of compounded even further because CGC, like PSA, like BGS, do have a reholder service, and some of these books got sent in for that reholder service and again slipped through the crack, right? CGC didn't realize that the book had been swapped out. And I know their, reholder service, as it talks through on the website, is not to regrade the book. But at the same time, you like to think that a grader would maybe do a quick once-over to make sure that the book in that slab is matching the other one, and it has also not been tampered with. And speaking of tampering, there's a video here that I found in one of the groups that I'm in on Facebook. And to give you guys some context, I am a big comic book collector. I have been for a long time, and I recall hearing stories about this all the way back in 2010. So I wasn't surprised to sort of see this come up again, but I was surprised to see it be as big as what it actually is. But to show you how this person was allegedly doing this, somebody's trying to do it themselves over here. And I'll mute the video, sorry. And you can sort of see the guy's basically just taking a heat gun, and this is from Immaculate Comics, and somebody else must have posted it on social media. I'll cover up their names in case they don't want to be shared, but you can sort of see they're basically putting a heat gun on the corner of the slab, and then it allows them to put a flathead screwdriver in there and open the slab without actually damaging it, without actually cracking it, which looks like it's a huge red flag with the design of the slab itself. And again, I'm curious, when I watched this last night, I was like, well, is this also happening in sports cards? Are people also cracking open, sports card slabs, i.e. PSA slabs like this as well? And yes, I know the way these are sonic sealed differ between the companies, but could this be happening there as well? And that's a very fair point to be asking. And what you sort of see here is the guy basically just reseals it with glue. The glue is very hard to spot, as what he does explain within the video. But what, again, is concerning is that that glue is not noticeable. The tampering is not noticeable by the people that were reholdering the card, or reholdering the slab, I should say, or prospective customers. It just means that you need to be a bit more careful than what you actually are right now when you're buying stuff. And you can see here he's put a Hulk 181 which is the first appearance of Wolverine, into random Hulk and Thunderbolts book. I'm not sure if that's the first appearance of someone. I might be wrong on that, but again, it highlights how they're exactly doing it, and it's a huge problem, like I said. But the thing that is super relevant, as I talked to in the opening of this video for sports cards, is this is not new, right? We've heard of stories exactly like this happening with sports cards as well. In this video over here, where we spoke about this incredibly systematic and pervasive, whatever you want to call it, soccer syndicate scam, where you had upwards of millions of dollars of soccer cards basically be scammed and pushed through these graders. And what was sort of happening was this individual was allegedly, making fake soccer stickers, amongst other things, setting them into PSA, SGC, BGS, and all that sort of stuff, getting them through, and then they were basically grading them, and then they were selling them on the secondary market. And it became such a huge problem that, these graders were doing it in such crazy volumes that this guy eventually got caught, and, upwards of millions of dollars were scammed out of the hobby as a result. And what made that whole process, even more alarming was the fact that BGS graded a heck of a lot of them, and BGS did not have a guarantee in place, and they do not have a guarantee in place. So there was a number of people that had bought them from PWCC auctions graded in BGS slabs, and they were shit out of luck. And I have friends that have bought some of these themselves, right? And unlike what CGC are doing here, CGC have a good guarantee in place. So irrespective of how pervasive and huge this issue actually is, they're looking after their customers. But when this sort of stuff has happened from a sports cards perspective in the past, they really haven't done much. And, to take the situation even further, because that is obviously fake cards going into real slabs, what this individual was also doing, not on the grand scale that we saw with CGC, but taking genuine slabs, cracking them open, and replacing them with, a different slab, or even sometimes reusing the same slab and then replacing it with an inferior card or a fake card. So essentially the same thing that's happening with these CGC comics. So again, it's not like it's just happening in the comic book realm. This stuff is happening a lot and very often in the sports card space as well. You see it happen a heck of a lot. I'm sure you can quickly Google PSA replace card and you'll find stories of this. I tried doing it beforehand to find a couple more examples. I couldn't find the exact ones that I was thinking of, but this one in question is a complete mirrored example of what is basically happening with CGC Comics. And the reason why I mentioned at the very start as to why I think this is super relevant is because, number one, it's also happening in our space as well. But I'm curious to see what CGC is going to try and do in this space, and whether or not they're going to try and implement additional anti-tamper methods to try and catch this stuff moving forward. Now, I don't know what that looks like, and I think things can always be tampered with and faked and altered and all that kind of stuff, but obviously they've got a glaring problem within their process, and I talk through that all the time. Whilst it's very good they've come out with a response like this, and they've got that strong guarantee in place, which is why I like them as a card grader as well, because their guarantee supports the submitter and the buyer, unlike PSA, which only supports the buyer. I'm curious to see what else they're going to try and do, because they have this huge problem. They need to fix their process. This has been happening, and I've been hearing stories all the way back in 2010, like I just said, but this stuff is like next level. You're talking hundreds of books that they know of. And in my opinion, when they're coming out, as you can see on screen here, and they say a few hundred books, that tells me there's a lot more out there, and they maybe don't know it just yet, or they're trying to withhold some information. Now, maybe that's too tinfoil to think they're withholding information. Maybe that was a poor choice of words, but you guys get where I'm trying to go with this. And I think it's a huge problem, like I said, and I'm curious whether or not this is going to impact their card grading, side of things as well, and whether or not some things can happen to their, TCG and sports card slabs. Can the same, thing occur with people use heat guns, as I showed you in this video over here? So, I just wanted to bring that to your attention, because whilst it is comic book related, I think it has direct parallels to the sports card space. I think there are going to be things that are going to be happening with CGC that PSA, BGS, SGC would be paying very close attention to, on how they handle the situation, what methods they put in place to make sure something like this doesn't happen again. Because, again, like I mentioned, this sort of stuff is happening with sports cards as well. It's a huge problem. And, could this be the death of CGC Comics? I don't think so. Have they lost a lot of trust? Sure. Is it going to be difficult for them to win that trust back? I think with, the true blue collectors, the guys that have been around for a long time, that have those huge golden age and silver age, sets and CGC stuff, I think they're going to be fine still using them, because they've always bought books, not the slabs, right? They've done the research before they bought the slab. But for the people that were quick to maybe just buy a slab and trust the label, this is another example of why you can't do that. And maybe those people will struggle to have that trust rebuilt in them. Now, at the same time, what we've seen in sports cards is when people sort of see scams happen, they sort of ignore it and just be like, who cares? And they just go back to buying this sort of stuff. So maybe it won't impact them at all, but I just think it's a super, relevant and important thing to keep front of mind. Now, me just mentioning those guys that collect Golden Age and Silver Age books has just triggered my memory. If you guys want to watch something that's pretty cool on YouTube, It's this guy over here, Cougar Comics, who I'm subscribed to on my personal channel. I will subscribe to him on my Dan the Cardman channel as well. He hasn't put out content for quite some time, but this guy is a really cool watch and pretty fun, even if you don't like comic books, because what this guy essentially does is he buys a lot of CGC graded cards and books, I should say, not cards, and cracks them out live on camera. And I've been watching this guy, you know, since he first started making videos, which is, you know, shockingly now 11 years ago, which is pretty wild to think about, right? But it's pretty cool. He hasn't got that many videos. He hasn't made anything quite some time. He's an older gentleman, and like I said, he's got a lot of really cool Silver Age books from when he was a kid, but he cracks those things open and inspects the books and makes sure that it does, in fact, match the grade. And in the past, I've talked about him as well when I've talked about how there's a bit of a play, in my opinion, when you're looking at old label stuff. Like, and I've talked about this before with CGC, where you've got these older books that have the old labels from back in the day, you know, early 2000s, late 90s, I think, as well, where those books have a premium when they're in 9.8, 9.6 condition over the higher graded ones from the current day, because what this guy found and many others is that the books were graded better back in the day. And my mindset on that goes to PSA as well. I think, you know, older PSA stuff, obviously you have to be very careful because that stuff was easily faked. Those cards were often graded a little bit tougher than they are today, just based on volume, right? And he talks about this a lot within his videos. So if you want to watch a guy crack open some slabs and look through books and talk about, you know, why he likes collecting, please do check him out, because he's really enjoyable. And whilst he hasn't made a video for 9 months, I've literally watched every single one of his and been watching it for, you know, like he just saw 11 years, which is a bit depressing to think about, but I absolutely love his stuff. So please do check it out. It just triggered my mind when I spoke about these older guys buying the books, not the slabs, because that's exactly what he does. And I'm just really curious to see what you guys have to think about his channel. So let me know down in the comments below, you know, what you think of him, and let me know what you think about this whole CGC problem, because it's huge, right? And you're talking significant amounts of money, and it might not be well known right now. And by that, I mean, we don't actually know how big the problem actually is. This could be a lot more systematic and systemic, pervasive, whatever you want to call it, than what we think right now. So, you know, please share your thoughts down below. And as always, I'll see you guys in the next one. Merry Christmas once again, even though Christmas has passed, and have a happy new year. Cheers.